All right. So this is going to take you down a path of a few things. And before we jump into this abyss of things, I really want to kind of focus on the biggest problems with PowerShell when it comes to the security aspects. And unfortunately, it's things that tend to be up front center with a lot of users. Phishing emails, attachments, Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, things that have macros, just the kind of general behavior of PowerShell execution, and then looking at some things that way systems can be compromised in other ways, and what should be leveraged, things that have been around for a couple of years now that people aren't taking advantage of, especially when I do like security assessments of environments or have advisory calls. Find out that they don't turn the dials away from default too much. Sometimes that's application compatibility requirements. Other times it's just ignorance. And it's not until something bad happens that they decide that they need to do something after the fact. And that's really, really unfortunate. I'm going to start with my favorite example. How many of you seen one of these in real life? Well, shame on you. You opened it up. You should have never opened the document to begin with. But it's amazing how people just click through those prompts. I don't care. It's like a kid wanting to play a game online. Just get rid of the pop-up. I don't care what I'm clicking. I'm just going to make it show up. Because I like getting attachments from like the Ministry of Defense of Romania or something. And that's exactly who I work with on a day-to-day basis. But there are some protections that are built in. Unfortunately, there's speed bumps. Nothing more than that. You can dial the dials a little bit to limit the potential impact or the opportunity that may be there. But this should be a big warning sign. What I'm going to start off with is talking about phishing emails and the things that come in the form of Office attachments. Because what's going on behind the scenes of this is a little bit uglier. And it comes in a couple different formats. And apologies if this is too small. Some of you might be able to quickly grab what's happening in this little VBA, or basically Visual Basic for Applications. It's a macro. That's the reason why that Enable Content button was there in the first place, because it wants to run something. Default behavior of that XLM page, or whatever the older or the newer format, if it's a macro-enabled modern version. But it did tell us it was an old version. But there's a URL here. It's trying to go fetch something. So this is that beginning of the where if the system is connected to the internet and hopefully it's not an admin account, because that's really, really worse, because now we got things that are going to probably go somewhere in the system that's really bad. But this is a stage 1 download. Going to talk out to a command and control or C2 endpoint of some type, and bad things will happen. Unfortunately, this is not how a lot of things are happening anymore. Because of all those protections that went on at the network layer. Well, now we got proxies or firewalls and things, or maybe we're actually doing a little gleaning of the attachments and looking at the code. So the evolutionary next step in things, well, let's just embed the bad stuff directly. So now we've got the code that's obfuscated as a bunch of gobbledygook. I don't have to go get the executable because the network has been somewhat hardened. The client is still wide open, unfortunately, and users are still ignorant because they're still opening them up and clicking on them. It's even digitally signed, which is great, so we know if it's been tampered with. And so the adversaries get a little bit smarter with what's going on. But there's no real difference between the first one and the second one. This one just doesn't require that extra step of going through the network or touching something in the outside world. And these things still happen too. I'm going to show some other things. They're pretty cool. In this case, what makes it all really, really ugly is eventually, whether I downloaded the file or I brought it in directly as part of the attachment itself, I'm going to jump out and run some PowerShell with that payload, whatever it happens to be, that script that I'm going to call. And that's what I've highlighted here in this little piece here. There's basically an execution script that's going to take the payload and do bad things. And that's really, really unfortunate. In the world that I work with, and for those who may be members of DC 919, I've spoken there a couple times, and I do some things with the other local security groups that do meet around here. But bad people are using these things. APTs, hopefully you never have to experience any of these, but did a little example here. from 32 and 10 and 34, known users of Excel documents and Word documents with these types of attachments that are on there. They go after financial institutions for a pretty common reason. There's a need to get money, to get funding, because these APTs are not directly nation-state backed to some degree, unlike Russians and the Chinese, where they have all the funds in the world to play with. In some cases, they have to feed their endeavors with some money, and this is what we refer to as Sutton's Law. Anybody know who Willie Sutton was? Yeah. You think you do? All right. So you probably hear about Sutton's Law in its more glorified version from Hollywood called Occam's Razor. So one of the most notorious, most wanted FBI folks in the early 1920s robbed a lot of banks, and he was asked, basically why do people rob banks? That's where the money's at. Yeah. So having to be aligned to the financial world of things, APTs are a constant barrage. Trying to get these things seeded into the environment, trying to get things to happen. And if you look at some of the research that's been produced by various organizations, I like picking with Palo Alto and FireEye. They have a lot of good research, and they're very, very public about the things that they find and sharing information. This is a little dated, but it was the most recent version I could find off Palo Alto's Unit 42, for those who are aware of it. But statistical analysis of the file types, the attachments that were coming in on email. Obviously, EXEs are a little bit easier to block, but that's very, very popular. Given the date and time of when this was collected, it's kind of gone the way of the dodo bird. But you'll notice the things that come in right behind that are, well, Office document. And then, of course, DLL files directly. But DLL's only one out of the sample of 4,100. But still a very, very bad thing. So there's opportunity here. And if PowerShell is sitting in its default state on systems, or if for some reason the environment hasn't gotten off of Windows 7 yet, and maybe they're still using version 2.0 from an execution perspective, bad things can really, really happen. And PowerShell is actually being used quite heavily in a more embedded format. If you look at some of the things that happen after the fact, when it comes to the reconnaissance or the lateral movement opportunities that exist in a given environment, for those who have played with Metasploit or PowerSploit, which is a PowerShell module version of some things that are in Metasploit, then of course you've got Empire and some things that are fun, and there's some direct packaging. PowerShell's not the only thing. There's lots of opportunities for leveraging various APIs and components, .NET components or providers that happen to exist on the system, but it just becomes kind of the go-to for a lot of the adversaries because of the name itself. It's pretty powerful. It can do a lot. And if people are local admins, then it's really kind of an unrestricted pathway to doing a lot of things, not only in getting presence into the environment, but also performing these post operations, whether it's exploitation or taking the data out in an exfiltration type format, no matter how complicated it happens to be. But just be aware there's other opportunities. A lot of these still exist within the environment or used quite heavily. PowerShell is just one of the many that's out there. And if you go back and, let's say 10 years or so, there's probably a little bit more even spread across all of these within the environment. But PowerShell's kind of become, a go-to, especially with PowerShell Core moving over to the open source side of things and becoming a little bit more powerful. As far as an opportunity, because now it can reach more systems. The downside, and I've seen this a lot, again, talking with customers, is the default knee-jerk reaction has been, well, PowerShell is the most commonly used thing. Adversaries are using it just as much. I don't want to take away administrative behaviors, so what will we do? Which is really, really unfortunate, because we know what this really, really means for the adversaries. It means this, because there's so many ways around it if users are still admins, or if PowerShell's not curtailed in some way on the system to change its default behavior. It really just becomes a slowdown And I like using these wonderful examples that I tend to see in some government places I go. It doesn't really get rid of the problem. The problem is privilege or credential hygiene, really poor credential hygiene. Not doing things with the appropriate set of permissions, least privilege, least functionality as I should, but also not even controlling the opportunities that do exist with PowerShell, especially things that have been introduced since version 5 and moving forward in the form of the logging and the controls that you actually have from a management perspective. So you take away probably not only the most powerful tool for adminning, you also take away one of the most powerful tools for understanding what's going on in your environment and reporting on the systems. And even in some cases managing it through using like DSC and things like that. What we see in environments where they've done the magic button of removing PowerShell is they end up turning on more vulnerable management opportunities like RDP. We've seen what's happened with RDP over the last few months and the weaponization of some things there. Yes, we broke some things with some patches, but they're all fixed now. VBA still got some funness going on with that. But you took away something that the blue teamers of the world could really, really leverage and take use of if it was still present. In fact, there's some really nice things that could be done, even if PowerShell is not allowed, by using PowerShell on other systems. But again, it's really done nothing more than create a speed bump in the world of things. So you took away essentially the most secure administration as well as the security transparent management tool that's out there. How many of you are familiar with the MITRE attack framework? It looks something like this. I had to shrink it down to get it all on one page. It's evolved over the years. Like 10 years ago, it only had like 5 or 6 columns. Now it's got a ton. This is basically what happens when you turn on PowerShell. The 2 little red squares or rectangles, that's all that goes away. So you still have all these other forms of enumeration and footprinting and escalation and lateral movement and execution and so on and so forth. Really, really bad things. That's all that happened, but yet there are still a lot of security admins who are like, we're good. We're safe now. No, you basically hurt the environment more than you helped it. Yes?
Which 2 are those?
Oh, so you've got Windows PowerShell over here,
yeah,
which is basically execution. And then over here, lateral movement, this is Windows Remote Management.
Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, again, apologies for the teeniness of what's up there. But here's the kicker. People don't realize that when you turn this off, you don't turn off this. PowerShell is more than PowerShell.exe. It's an engine. It's a DLL file. It's a Windows automation that's behind each of those things. It's what so many other powerful things that exist in PowerShell are kind of built off of. So if PowerShell's embedded into an application or leverages that DLL in some way, uses that as a .NET entry point, it's still going to run whether you turned it off or not. And this is what has happened in the bad world of things, is that it doesn't matter if you turn PowerShell off. Adversaries can still embed their junk into other file types or other shells and let it roll, and you did nothing. So that the analogy of the little gate and driving around with the speed bump is what the reality happens to be. Yeah,
but just like uninstalling it where it's not needed, like in HR and stuff like that.
You still have a DLL that's potentially registered. Yeah. So the question was, what if you remove the executable? You have to get rid of a component that's kind of a requirement in Windows. Yeah, you're going to break things. Yeah. And it's actually kind of a common question. I've seen this quite a few times from customers that are looking to somehow magically secure Windows Server 2012, not R2, 2012. Can I remove .NET from the OS? No. We kind of need that. Service host kind of depends on it. You've got a bunch of services that use service host that need that .NET component. So, yeah, it's not there. How many of you have ever heard of Lua, L-U-A, as another wonderful thing? So this is an example of how to embed things. So these are applications, again, it's very, very tiny because I pulled it from the Wikipedia page, of all these third-party vendor applications and systems. A lot of them are network appliances that basically have a LUA endpoint that you can send something to with my favorite, Nmap. So I don't necessarily have to worry about what's going on from a PowerShell perspective. I can use one of those other languages that's out there And it's just a matter of doing a little research, finding out what can be done. I go and look at maybe the default password list, or I just look at that Wikipedia page for, let's see if I see certain ports that are open on devices, and I know that I can do a good old nmat trick where I can send a script to a listening port, and if it's an API, it'll consume it and do something. It may not require authentication in some cases, and that's bad. In this case, this is one that's available on the wiki page from Nmap. It's a remote execution for calculator. And you can do a lot worse things than calculator. Just let you know, this is just an example that's not going to hurt anyone's feelings. But it's what can be done. And if you've never played with Nmap like this, you are missing some fun, because there's some really cool things you can do with other systems, depending on what that little port number is and what that application or service happens to be on the back end. It might just process the bits and do exactly what it is that you want it to do. The other thing, too, is when you turn off PowerShell, it's not an effective control. That's just a part of it. You're looking at something that's, down in that application whitelisting, sort of, not really, but just be aware that controls come in multiple flavors. You've got things that are obviously preventative in nature, things that you should be doing all the time. I can't beat this drum hard enough from the Microsoft perspective. Patch, and keep patching. If we break it, we'll regress it, don't worry. Antivirus, we have something built in, it's pretty powerful. I'm not going to sell it to you, but it's pretty good, especially when it comes to things like that are embedded in documents and being able to see it on the first signal. But then you kind of increase the security posture as you go up this magic triangle here. Looking at things you explicitly don't want to allow in the environment, just be aware that you're never going to know all the things you don't want. It's much easier, believe it or not, to whitelist the things that you do want to allow, things that are explicitly required from the operational perspective of that given system. You should always have auditing in play. There's nothing wrong with a lot of data other than where do I stick it and how do I consume it. But auditing of the protections, make sure they're in place, as well as what is happening. I'm going to dive into this aspect much deeper towards the end of this. And then, of course, how can I look at what has happened? When we get into the remediation or the detection, kind of a gray area there, I want to be able to have something that, from a forensics perspective, is going to be a tell that something has happened or what something is doing on the given system, and then I'm storing that somewhere. And then if I have the ability to apply some form of analytics to that signal, that's even better. With my customer, they're slowly becoming, when we finally finish this project, they'll be the largest users of JIT GIA outside of Microsoft and Azure in the world. All administration and all ITSM type of activities are going to be PowerShell through GIA. No RDP on any servers anymore. Something they were already doing in the Linux world. Now they've basically taken the knowledge that they've learned and the operational aspects of what they learned from the Linux Unix world and are bringing that to the Windows side. You have to have a serious business case to get a server with GUI now from 2016 forward. Everything is done on core. 2019 makes it a little bit easier. And then on the remediation side of things, capturing of memory-based artifacts. Going back to that, that early piece, sometimes I don't even have to open the attachment or open the email. Things just happen because I previewed the email, and things happen in memory that reassembles the code and executes something. And that's really, really bad. We've been listening to things since the last decade or so as far as what should be done from a security perspective. These are all the different engines that happen to exist on the left-hand side there. The various capabilities within that as far as what it can do, event logging and encryption and things as far as memory protection. You'll notice there's a shining green bar across the middle there. That happens to be PowerShell. Untrusted input tracking does have a no, but there's got some asterisks with that. You can get rid of that, make that a yes with GIA, which I'm going to talk about, just enough administration. I'll dive into that a little bit more. As we've started to add more of these engines into products, specifically Python, we've actually become one of the contributors to the Python since 5.5.2, 5.3, and forward. And you'll notice that Python's getting some of the PowerShell capabilities built into it as well. Python's available in SQL now, which is a lot of fun. I'm not a SQL head, but apparently that's something that's been asked of from the community as we started doing SQL and Linux. Let's just not have to change things up. But PowerShell is by far gives you the most visibility, believe it or not, across the board as far as what can be done from the forensics perspective and protection. Since I mentioned G, I want to dive into exactly what G is for those who have never seen this or definitely not using it yet. You should be for administration. This is a simple exercise example. I don't know who this bad guy is. I think it's somebody famous. This is one of these slides I stole from Lee Holmes that tells the story. You will see someone you probably recognize if you're a PowerShell person in a minute here. So what I want to do is I want to remote desktop into a server. So the good old-fashioned MSTSC, a terminal server client, and I get access denied. No RDP. Crap. Well, how do I get in there? So, hey, Jeffrey, I really want to be admin on server 1 so that I can restart DNS, because you should totally be full admin on the server just to restart DNS. A lot of organizations do it this way. You know, you're a server operator. Boop, go in. They forget about DNS admin and things like that. So, no Gentle Kiwi. I guess that's who that's supposed to be. You have to use PowerShell to connect the server. All right. So I'll enter a PS session, go into server 1, and I can restart service DNS, and everything's happy. But I can't do anything else. That's basically what GIA does. GIA gives you a configuration of prescribed commandlets, even the syntax, the parameterization, even sometimes the values of the parameters. I can even preload my configuration with functions that replace default commands that may be used in the console or other things that may be more powerful. So I could issue like a restart computer, and it will tell me no, that's denied. Or I could try to use a native, utility like ping, and it tells me that ping is denied because I put a little function in there that replaces that executable with the message. So when we do this, ta-da, the admin wins and basically is in control of what's happening on the system. And this is really should be kind of step 1 on things, because the administrative model is pretty ugly. This is security exposure 101. I've got capability is whatever my privilege allows for, and a lot of environments these are static type memberships. I'm in the server operators, or I'm a local administrator, so therefore my time window is whenever I'm connected, and I'm actually holding that privilege at all times. If someone can take advantage of my credential, then they have whatever I have, and they can kind of use it unrestrained. And it may even, if they're smart enough, may be able to leverage this in a fashion that looks like its normal behavior. Maybe even get really advanced and generate some tickets that are fictitious and have me work on things as an adversary. What we're doing with GIA is basically this, or I shouldn't say GIA. If we want to harden things a little bit, we do something that's more time-based. So I still have the capability, but it's confined to a window of time. And this gets into combining the capabilities of PowerShell into privileged identity management, PIM, or PAM if you're doing it from an Azure perspective. There's other things that exist through third-party vendors, CyberArk and Thacotic and Lieberman, that do a very similar thing. So that now I am all-powerful, but only for a little bit of time. Or in some cases, only for a particular session. That one time that I enter a PS session and go to a system. And combining the two together, or maybe even limiting it in a GIA perspective. So my capability is bound only to a specific role or function on that given system. The intersection of those two is the GIA model. So I have prescribed capabilities, things that are known to be executed or done, or maybe even fully automated through some type of ITSM tool, but then they can only occur within a time window on a given system or within a given session. And that's really where we like to see people get to with things, and not hear these horrible ransom things that happen to every municipality in the world. What it looks like, yes.
So when you say time, you're talking about the maintenance window?
Oh, that'd be even better. Yeah.
Time as in they only have this privilege access for 10 minutes.
Yeah. So depending on the PIM system, the question was about the time aspects of it. I'll use our MemPAM as an example, the Microsoft Identity Manager.
Yeah.
Within that, you get a time frame, a token or a certificate that may have a 4-hour window, and that's it. Or if it's really locked down, it's a connection string that only allows the session one time. So I can connect, I can work indefinitely, but as soon as that times out or I close my PS session, privilege is gone. Yep, it's wiped. Even better if that's not a static group membership either. It's dynamic in nature. It's even better. Groups stay empty and protected. Great question. So here's what a very, very simple role capability file looks like. This is really dumbed down. There's a lot more that should be done within this, but basically you can control what's needed, give it a description so people know what that happens to be. If they're reading this after the fact or you get hit by the proverbial bus or you win the lottery. What modules are required during the session so that they're there, that I have the capability to do whatever that prescribed task happens to be within that role capability. I have my visible commandlets. Everything else from all the providers and anything that's there in PowerShell is not available. I only have these commandlets. Now you can go further and even provide, things like parameters that are valid and even the values for the parameters. Like if I want to make sure they stay on localhost or loopbacks and things like that, I can even put that into these. But notice here they gave me the things that are probably synonymous with someone who's doing some DNS maintenance. I've got the ability to get a list of services. I can interact with the DNS service specifically because I'll need to restart service and get DNS server cache. I can clear the cache, show DNS server cache for whatever reason, if I'm working on a forwarder maybe, or I just want to see what may be working on a system. And then they've also done some function definitions. I can use who am I. So the function is representing a default command that may be available in the Windows console. So if I run who am I, it's really going to run a script block, the PS Center info, and throw that back. Functions replace the behavior of those embedded or default commands so that I can't use them in bad ways. If you look at the execution order that exists within PowerShell, functions override native commands. Native commands are way at the end. Functions override scripts, override a bunch of other things, commandlets. So they always come first. And if you do this is, I think I had to slide out of order a little bit, but this is the intersection of JIT and GEO. So I have to remember to put that back in the right place. But you've got capability that's prescribed in a configuration. I do this very securely with a lot of dials turned up, which I'm going to show about the logging and the forensics aspects behind it. And then it's only available at a particular time on the system. This is secure administration at its finest. And I didn't have to turn off PowerShell. PowerShell is still all-powerful underneath it all. In fact, you can't really turn off PowerShell anyway because embedded programs and things that use the automation DLL, that's there. And this is what, and this is what should be happening. And this is a very slow to evolve conversation with a lot of customers, no matter how many advisory calls I have, is that you've got this thing that gives you so much information about what's happening in the environment. You just have to know how to tame it and how to use that information. So, I've got the ability to control in a very effective manner across the entire enterprise module logging or script logging, which is great, transcripts across systems. I can do this securely where users can't just read the secrets that are in. I'm going to show that. And also integration with ANTIMALWARE, ANSI, or anti-malware scan interface. You don't have to use Defender. You can use third parties that are tapped into that API. We did open it up finally so that the other big players in security, not so much security, can interact with the signals that are going on there. But what you get in the modern stance of PowerShell is effective management. You can leverage group policy to control all these things and should be using these things. You will see them in STIGs and in baselines and things of that nature. I think CIS actually turns up a couple of things. But you should turn these things on. Now, you have to be careful when you turn these things on. If you don't control how you've implemented it, then you're going to have a big problem. You want to have something that's going to collect the logs. You've got WEFLs or the built-in Windows Event Forwarding, which is great. Believe it or not, Windows has a SIEM. We also have one in Azure that can take these things. But if you're using the Splunk or a logarithm or all those other things, you want to pull this data somewhere, and more importantly, maybe apply some analytics to it. You don't have to record screen sessions or typing and things like that, but maybe have some kind of logic that is looking through this, which I'm going to go into a little bit deeper because we built some tools to help you with that. Yes?
So when you enable logging, you'll be able to tell whether it's run from a function or a command?
You'll be able to tell the session, but you'll be able to tell what the interaction in the engine was, yes.
Okay.
Yep. If it was coming from a session like configuration versus PowerShell EXE, yes.
Okay.
Yep, that's present. How many of you have ever seen module logging? or script block logging, what that looks like. Okay, good. So this shouldn't look too foreign in nature. You get a lot of detail, and sometimes that's maybe not the best, but it really is, believe it or not, a lot of transparency as far as what's happening. And it's not just what's going on interactively. It will log the things that are happening, like in the background of that Excel document or the Word document that you got from the Ministry of Defense in Romania. Transcripts are very, very important as well. Transcripts will capture the interactive details of everything that's happening. You've got to be a little bit careful with this, though, because it will capture things that you might not want everyone seeing. In larger environments where there's a well-defined SOC, some type of security operations that are, they're the ones that are really ingesting these logs, these can be encrypted. They have the key that can open it up. Things are basically logged or transcribed with the public key. They're the holders of the private key, so therefore they have access to it. You can keep the logs locally on the system, or you could forward them to a centralized container of some type. Again, depending on what your SIEM approach is or logging approach happens to be in the environment. There are some customers that I speak with that actually feed these types of transcripts and the logs from script and module perspective into a truth system that basically scans them in real time and flags things for suspicious behavior, which is that's very high up on the evolutionary scale of PowerShell security. Those things are happening. We use a system within Azure that does that. So if there's some type of interaction between Microsoft and the customer's environment and their tenant, everything that we're doing is going through one of those truth systems, and we'll flag security if we're doing stuff we're not supposed to be doing, which is very, very nice. What if things are encoded? This usually is question number one. Someone's doing encoded commands, or they got the gobbledygook that's packaged up into a document of some type, or the payload is obfuscated in some way that just, there's no way of turning this back into its clear text. If we were to take this hash in its kind of real format, and it looks like this, this is another form of obfuscation. It's a little difficult to read. It's a lot of appendage that's going on with what's happening with that execution. The reality, though, in the Microsoft log is that even though you'll get this event, this particular 4104, you also get this 4104 with it. So you see it in its how it was executed, but then you also see it in how it was actually interpreted by the engine, which is in the clear text. You can't hide from this anymore. And that was like one of the powerful tools that adversaries were leveraging, was the fact that, I can use obfuscation, or I can encrypt it in some given way, and do some trickery within my script that decodes it and executes it in memory. It doesn't matter anymore. It's there in clear text and in a log that you can feed into whatever it is that you're looking for. And if you put some, like I say, some analytics behind as far as what commandlets are being used, combined with time of day or system names and what roles may be installed in those given systems, it's a good thing.
But that's only if you have transcript enabled.
In this case, this is logging.
Okay.
So this is script block logging.
Good.
Yep. So transcript's not required for this one.
Okay.
Yep. And I'm going to actually go through the event IDs that are important, that are very, very helpful. I'll pause on that slide for a little bit longer. So what about things that are malicious in nature? Someone's doing some pen testing, so they're on their Kali Linux. They're experts. And they're going to basically run something that's going to feed this into it. So I've got PowerShell with all of the known dials, turn to 11, for how to get around all the execution protections. Believe it or not, this does work. So you got the hidden, no profile, non-interactive, encoded command. There's some other things that are in there that are encoded that have additional parameters for execution bypass and whatnot. It's ugly. Well, in the case of AMPC, something like this happens. Let's say that was something being fed through a document. This is kind of shifting gears a little bit. It's not from a command line. I actually opened up something that was an obfuscation within an attachment. Well, number one, I'm going to log it, that I had the macro and I had this code in its yucky form. VBA is going to do a trigger through AMPC, which antivirus is going to scan. And again, this used to be us only in Defender, but we've opened that up. AMC is available to some other participating partners. And then if it generates alert, then it goes back and blocks, or it's at least going to create a signal. In the case of Defender ATP, this is basically block on site, first time. No one else gets ransomed or whatever in the environment. You might lose a sheep, but you don't lose the flock. You definitely don't lose any shepherds, to use that analogy. And as things happen, of course, you get some evidence behind it as well. When it comes to protecting those events, as I had mentioned, there is an opportunity for encryption. So if I have someone who is a local administrator and they can get in to read the logs, and I don't want them to be able to see these logs because of the use of certain parameters or maybe passwords and things like that. It doesn't record passwords anyway, but you can have this encrypted. And again, the important side of that is, most cases, the consumers of this is probably an application or a scene of some type, or the SOC, the watchers of the world, those that are wearing blue team credentials in some given way. And that's something that should be leveraged when there's an opportunity for someone who may be an insider threat to try to find out what's going on the given system. Useful events to be aware of. I kind of put this into my collector, and this is another slide taken from Lee Holmes as far as what you should be looking for when you've dialed up the forensic aspects of PowerShell. These are the events that should go into something that gives you some visibility as to what's going on. System log out of 104, which is, hey, someone tried to clear the log. That's always an important one. That one should be on everyone's default list of things. On the security log, basically already configured for PowerShell profiles. So 4656, anytime a profile or modification of any configuration of PowerShell is touched, you get an event that describes the who, the what, the when, where of that activity. PowerShell log, the 400 and 800, basically startup, hosting application, the version. This is where it maps back to how was it run. Was it embedded? Was it from the shell? Things like that. The 800 is the actual command and parameter logging. Whatever was passed. And you'll get the raw format. If it was obfuscated, it's ugly. And then, of course, the interpreted or the realistic aspects of that execution. And then you have the 4104s, warning or verbose, depending on how that's turned on. The script block automatic or detailed verbose logging of script blocks. And then the last two, big number, 53507, operational log. That's if the debugger is attached to a process. We're doing things in memory. And then 91, user-connected system with PowerShell remoting, which I think is the next session. Someone's going to talk about PowerShell remoting in a secure fashion. Yeah?
Another question. 5-digit embedded IDs.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just in Azure, or is that on-prem?
No, it's on-prem. Okay. Yeah, so we've moved away from the 2-digit, 3-digit, some 4 digits. Yeah, we've run out of numbers now. We didn't run out of numbers. Do something that no one would think of configuring. Well, I mean, it's kind of Microsoft's mantra too. You know, what did they rename it? Where did they stick it?
Seen more than Azure. Yeah, 5-digits. Just curious.
Yeah.
Sorry, what is the difference between the two 4104 events?
Oh, one's just the warning, one's verbose. So it depends on to what level you have it set in the registry. Yeah, where the default is just the warning, where the verbose is, I mean, you get a lot more behind it. You get what was in that screenshot from PowerShell console. That was that blue that had everything.
So that's your local policy setting defines.
Yes. Yep. And you can set that through group policy or directly on registry keys for systems that aren't attached. Sometimes things get really, really ugly. This is some nice trickery. If someone's doing invoke obfuscation or is trying to hide things in very, very cryptic ways, starting in version 5, this goes away. Yeah, this still runs in this fashion. These are still valid, but what you get in the logs is what the result actually was. So there's no barrier from intelligence perspective, from the forensic standpoint of trying to figure out what these things mean, or putting them into other tools to try to decipher what's going on with it. You get the clear text, which is great. That symbolic PS1 actually just did a hello world, but I mean, you look at something that's a couple bytes in size just to create hello world. I should say more than a couple bytes. That's a couple K. How many of you are aware of the AST? Or have heard of the AST, Abstract Syntax Tree? All right. This is super advanced. So there's some rules, believe it or not, behind the scenes of things. And the rules is what those truth systems are using when they're deciphering or trying to look at the analytical aspects of execution. Is this something that's normal? Lee Holmes and some others put together a wonderful little tool that will detect scripts and whether or not they're reliable or something that should be trusted. And what it does is it scans through the obfuscation and it looks for things. It gives you some basic reports. This is a free tool. I'm going to point to it a little bit later. That's out there. It's been available in the tech community from PowerShell for quite some time. No one uses it, but it's a great way, especially if you're scanning attachments that are coming into the environment. With this tool, it'll tell you if it's bad or not, if it's doing legitimate things or not so legitimate things. And there's an important reason behind that, and this was done with Daniel Bohannon and Lee Holmes at DerbyCon last year. They did a talk at Black Hat, another one at DEF CON as well related to this. You can watch those YouTubes. FireEye even did a reproduction of it because Daniel's with FireEye. And this is the reason behind it. No matter what you do and tell people to stop doing or trying to not do, they're going to find a way to make it happen. And it's just the reality of things. I know the worst offenders from a security perspective, too many waters, are the admins. I don't want anything to get in my way. I should be admin all the time. And as the system gets more and more locked down, I have to find ways to get around those controls. In this case, to learn how to ride a unicycle. But it's just a really, really ugly reality. One of the things that's also important is, device guard and application whitelisting are really the way to capture those offenders. The ones that know what the signs are and know what the blockers are, but they know the way around it. There should be something that's keeping them really on the rails no matter what. And obviously in a fashion where they can't advert the execution. Device guard is going to imply something called constrained language mode. How many of you have heard of this? Yeah, so it basically gets rid of things that are not standard or built in for the most part. And if you have some Kerberos errors in your environment, you're probably getting this by, that typically happens over a trust that's broken in some given way. So I can do things, or I try to do things, that trusted script is not trusted at all. It can't execute. And I encourage people to kind of get a little better understanding of what constrained language mode does. It's something that happens for anything that's out of policy. So if you're doing GIA, you're just going to get constrained in some cases. Interactive PowerShell commands that you try to execute are going to go in constrained language mode, which means, they can't call things they're not supposed to in the environment. Things that are in policy, whatever that policy happens to be from a device guard perspective, are going to run in full language. So it's really just, you can do what you're supposed to do and nothing else, regardless of who you think you happen to be. The restrictions for this is more just a reminder of what you get, and that's it. There's restrictions with constrained language mode. And again, it's supposed to keep things nice and safe. Nothing, though, is more important than, and this is the DevOps piece, secure coding, and then the SDL side of things. You should always write scripts if they're going to be production quality in a fashion that's going to keep things safe. And because of that wonderful world of the syntax tree, believe it or not, there's a way to check your scripts. There is something that can be used to review code and check on these things. Most people have never seen it. They created a hunting tool that's based on the AST. This is a sample script from Lee Holmes that's out there that's looking for something. And I know I've got time, so I got to pop over to this because this is probably more important. I encourage you to go read this one. The link is huge. Hopefully we'll share this. I don't have an aka.ms short lead for it. I should have made one for this presentation. This is a very, very powerful tool. This is actually embedded into some of the tools that I've seen in use in big enterprises that are scanning scripts to make sure that things are done in proper fashion. The script analyzer, there was an old script analyzer that was a plugin for the ISE. This is a VS Code, so Visual Studio Code add-on or tool, and it can be used to scan entire repositories. You can do things in mass. with this, taking a look at what's being used and how things should be updated. I had to grab a new screenshot because they updated it not too far back, but it's a wonderful, wonderful extension, and the power that it gives you. I don't know if anybody else needs a picture, but hopefully they make this available here. Is also looking like the Injection Hunter. This is another wonderful tool. It hasn't been updated since last year, but it kind of got it right on the third try. Everyone knows what injection is, right? You hear bad things about SQL. It's just the ability to append arbitrary code and do other things in a parameterized way that makes it work, even though it's not supposed to happen. So this is a way of going through and scanning items to see if there is a potential for PowerShell injection. Make your scripts safe. I don't think PowerShell injection is going to be the next thing to replace SQL injection on the OS, but it's not applicable. But it's really, really important. And these things are available for Studio Code and can run in real time. So it's analyzing things as you open them up or as you're writing them out. You'll get the nice warnings and errors. So use it. It's free. You don't have to have Visual Studio big time. You can just have the baby one, and it works great. In fact, I teach PowerShell classes all over the country, and I only teach using code now. ISE is done. I'm tired of ISE and some of the add-ons and all the things I have to load to make it look like this. Not to mention all the development is going into this area anyway. It's a lot easier move from this into some of the other bigger tools that are out there. So at this point, you got to be thinking, hopefully, we've got everything right. Unfortunately, we don't. These are three great things that should be in place. You've got logging. Hopefully, you've got device guard turned on the system as well to kind of help with the bad admins getting out. And you've got something that's doing script analysis proactively, or at least scanning after the fact of what may be going on if you're doing it from a forensics perspective. But that's not everything. Unfortunately, there's still this. And it's amazing how many environments have not turned it off. The ability to still execute based on the 2.0 model, where something in the script or someone does the parameterization that downgrades the execution. Please, get rid of 2.0. 2.0 is bad. You don't have any of these protections from a 2.0 perspective. So, please. Version 2, it had a purpose. It was a great evolutionary step to get to where we are in V5, V6, V7. Obviously, 6 and 7 are the core additions. Some little side notes, commentary for a couple questions, but for those who haven't seen this from Chris Thompson, in the world of PowerShell, they promised us freedom, but they delivered slavery. And that's an adversary talking. Someone who had a tool that could do everything that has been taken away because of the visibility and basically the commitment that we've had from an organization perspective to make PowerShell get to the point where it is a real execution engine as opposed to just running scripts and things like that, because it does a lot more than that in the system. It can. And even some other more notables have moved away from it, those that have some ties to some groups. This is just one that I grabbed from Matt Graber. Basically, the transparency and the opportunity from a forensic perspective for PowerShell is you can't hide now using PowerShell. For those who are doing investigations are basically going to be discovered. It can be undone. You can draw the map of the breadcrumbs of tiers to what actually was done if you have these things turned up. So PowerShell is a built-in honeypot, more or less. It has the capabilities to capture everything that is going on. You just have to turn it on and tame that in a particular way. So with that, any additional Q&A? Hit 45 minutes. All right. Feel free to take a card. Ask me questions after the fact. I'll be around for a little while. I do have to go home and pack because I got to travel tomorrow. But thank you. Almost had a full room. And that's it.